please place your electronic communication devices on silent or vibrate. We're here today for a call meeting of the Board of Education in response to an inquiry from the Board of Elections. And we have one agenda item. Is there any addition or modification to the agenda that any of the board members would like to make? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Second, John.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? All opposed? Unanimous. A couple of housekeeping matters. One, board members, we have a tribunal appeal we need to hear in the next few days. I had sent out an email inquiry about having it at 4 o'clock next week before the regular board meeting, and I've got, I think Ms. Cook thinks she's available, Mr. Cook's available, I'm available, I don't know if Mr. Kendall, Mr. Holmes, are y'all available before the board meeting next week?
It's on the 25th.
Is it the 25th?
The first.
The first.
Yeah, we got the next.
Oh. We can't do it right outside our time frame.
We have 10 days.
We have 10
I think
days.
that, well, let's back that up. When our, next Tuesday, are y'all available at 4 o'clock? You're available, Mr. Holmes is available, you're available, Ms. Cook? All right. Joni, next Tuesday at 4 o'clock,
Okay.
we'll do our tribunal appeal. All right, now we've got one item on our agenda, and I want to go over this as a housekeeping matter too, just to keep order in the meeting. We've got an inquiry from the Board of Elections. What I want to do is allow Dr. Jones to present whatever you'd like to present to the board. The board members would hold off asking your questions till he gets done. You can ask him whatever you want to at the end. Mr. Shepherd, you can then present whatever you need to, and the board members can ask you questions. And finally, Mr. Kendall, it involves you, so I'd like for you to present whatever you'd like for the board to hear from you in consideration of whatever we need to do, and answer any questions from the board members. I would ask that the board members not make any speeches or anything, just save your questions until the end, and then we'll get your questions answered. If you need to say something, please save that until we take any actions at the end of the meeting for or against whatever motions come up, and that way hopefully we can keep the meeting flowing along smoothly. So with that, Dr. Jones, please go to the podium and tell us whatever you need to tell us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the reason we're here is to discuss the response to the Board of Elections inquiry concerning the qualifications for the board members to run for election. As you know, you're required every year to get at least 9 hours for board certification. Mr. Phil Hartley, who is the board attorney for Georgia School Board Association, usually gives all of you that training at the GSBA Winter Conference. He's talked about what that training requirement is, and what I'd like to do is share with you what Phil Hartley has said most recently about school board training.
Training and development of individual board members has always been important in the state of Georgia, and obviously important to the Georgia School Board Association. The association sponsored one of the first pieces of legislation in the whole country requiring individual board members to seek school board and receive school board training at a certain number of hours, both for new board members and for veteran board members. Obviously, in recent years, the importance of that training in a formal sense has increased dramatically. Under the present statute, the State Board of Education is responsible for developing the mandated training program. Those training elements are set forth, and you will find those in other parts of this training material. But in that, there is a mandate that Not only individual board members receive training, but the board as a whole participate in what's called whole board training with their superintendent. That there be not only training on issues of statewide importance, but the local school district is responsible for providing specific training to new board members as well. But more than that, and more important in some ways to the individual board member, are the potential consequences now. Providing and receiving the training is a component of the code of ethics that every board member swears they will uphold. Receiving the training and agreeing to receive the training is part of the qualification to run for office, and the failure to receive training as required may keep an individual from being eligible to run for office. Receiving the training and participating in training is one of the 6 elements of the governance standards of the Southern Association accrediting process. And we all know how important accreditation is in the state of Georgia and to board members as a whole. So, providing and receiving this training has taken on increased importance, and the School Board Association remains committed through these sessions and through other sessions to providing the training that school board members need.
So members of the board, you all know Phil Hartley. He's the school board attorney for approximately 150 school systems in the state of Georgia. That information he provided has been given to all of you. That's my understanding of what the law actually requires and the actions that we've had to take. I would like to share with you next a memorandum. This is the memorandum, which is a local board training plan that you approved at the September 27th meeting of 2011. As you can see, all board members' names are listed with the exact place and date for when they will get the training. Mr. Kendall's listed here as number 4 for December 1st, 2011 for 6 hours. You also have the whole board training where on October 25th, you would get the additional 3 hours. This plan was approved, it was voted upon you 5-0 in that board meeting. A copy of that is in your packet that has been provided. I think Mr. Shepherd may go into a little bit more detail about that later. We are now discussing, though, the training that was scheduled for December 1st that Mr. Kendall did not participate in. The other item that I'd like to share with you, and let me get to it, talks about what happened when the training did not occur. We had another board meeting. It was September 26, 2012, and I'd like to play a clip of that for you. Please pay a particular attention to the comments that Mr. Holmes makes. He was the acting chairman at that meeting. He's going to make a comment about training. Mr. Kendall makes a comment about the calendar, and please listen to my response about it as well. June 26th. When did I say? I'm sorry, June 26th.
I'd like to call the Rufus Spalding County School System meeting to order at this time.
One that has electronic devices, including.
Yeah, that's where I got to stay. Like 4 hours.
And everyone should be clear that these are state doc closed. Our May 2012 financials, athletic event ticket prices for 2012-2013. School attendance zone, make sure you pay close attention to that. You know, that's always a hot item in our community. And, the Board of Education training program for FY13. And under announcements,
Mr. Chairman, before
yes,
you
sir.
move on, under the training for the board members, inside your packet on that info, if you look at that one, you will see that the last page is a copy of the annual report that I have to turn in. And I have to turn that in by August 1st. My request is that each of you look at it and just annotate the number of hours that you have in those different categories. I think I know what they are, but this gives me a check just to make sure I got the numbers correct. And so if you can fill those out tonight, leave them with me, and then we will go ahead and get that complete so we can get it signed off on by the end of the next meeting.
I'll be honest with you right now. Whatever Gail has down for me, that's what I did.
Currently, what we have here are the hours we went over to Griffin Risa, and what we did up in the line.
That's it.
And that's what I have for you to discuss.
So do you need me to fill it out?
No, since you told me that, I need it.
That's what I, no homework for us.
No homework, I'll take that. Especially since I got them camera. Mr. Campbell?
He got to go do some training.
You want this page, this is what you want back?
I want that back, or you can tell me what training you have.
Where am I supposed to locate this information? Was I supposed to be keeping records of all of that?
No, I have what I think's been sent in. I think the training you completed was over at Griffin Risa, when we did the whole board training.
Yeah, we did the whole board training.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is there any other training that you've done?
This year,
Yes,
this calendar year,
since July 1st of this past year, of 2000.
since July 1st?
Since July 1st, 2011.
Well, I guess not.
Okay.
That's probably it.
Okay.
All right. On the announcement, June 20.
That covers the training that was required. In order to get the training plan in that you had to meet, and all board members voted to approve 9 hours, those 6 hours that with GSBA had to be done by Mr. Kimball as well. That was an opportunity for us to identify when he did, if any other training was done. The reason I brought it up at that meeting was because it was not before the end of the period. There were still 4 days left for Mr. Kendall to have made up that training as well with GSBA online courses, but as far as I could tell, he did not do that. We did not actually sign that document until the next meeting in July. So there was approximately 2 weeks for him still to get that information in. The other item that I'd like to share with you is a PowerPoint. And this is an abbreviated version of it. But the state school superintendent, Dr. John Barge, on January 21st, 2011, shared some information with school superintendents about school board governance. These were the topics that were covered in that webinar, and this is some of the slides from it. I'm only going to show you about 6 or 7 of them. This is what they had done so far. They had actually approved the law. It was signed by Governor Perdue. The state board rule was adopted on 10/14/2010, and then final versions of the model code of ethics and the conflict of interest were approved. We're breaking new ground. That's where they are now. If you look at the second bullet, it says having well-trained board members was an important part of that law. And finally, what they were going to do next, this last bullet says the state board would adopt a training plan by July 1, 2011. The local boards would have 3 months after the state board's adoption to adopt a training plan that contains the minimum requirements of the state board. This shows where I was required to submit a document showing the compliance of training and the location where I had to send that information to. A couple questions are also asked just to help clarify. This question says, are board members that were elected before the effective date of Senate Bill 84 grandfathered in and exempt from the requirements? And as you look at it, it says that the Senate bill contains many provisions that apply only to board members that are elected or appointed after July 1, 2010. However, once a sitting board member runs for it and is again re-elected to the board, he or she is a board member that is elected after July 1. Thus, a board member that was elected before the effective date will not be subject to those provisions. But as you know, Mr. Kendall was elected after July 1, 2010. This question is even more on point. If a board member on which I serve, if a board on which I serve is considering a contract or the employment that might run afoul of Senate Bill 84, the state board rule, the local code of ethics, or the conflict of interest, what should I do? And it says consult your local attorney. That's what I have done by consulting Mr. Shepherd. Whenever there is danger that your actions may be unethical, it's always best to consult your local board attorney before you act. Failure to do so may result in sanctions, inability to qualify for future elections, or even removal from office. Third question. What should I do if one of my fellow board members is violating a provision of the Senate rule? the state board or the local code of ethics or a conflict of interest. Always try to resolve the matter with your local board of education in consultation with your local board attorney. Your local board has the authority to sanction its members as it deems necessary. If the issue persists after discussion by the local board and the issue is related to the eligibility of the office, you should contact your local election superintendent. And that's why we were able to send a letter to our local board of elections, because that's the point where we are now. And if the local election superintendent cannot assist you, you may have to contact the Secretary of State's office. And that's where I had to go. I have talked with Jennifer Hackenmeyer about this. I've talked with Phil Hartley about it. I've talked with John Barge about it previously. I'm convinced that the understanding that you've seen from Phil Hartley and what I presented today is the same understanding that you have of what this Senate bill means and the law that's in effect.
Don't turn it off. Don't turn it off. Can you go back? Can you go back a second?
To which part?
To that, next to the last, image that you just showed. Okay, if the issue persists after discussion by the local board and the issue is related to eligibility for office, you should contact your local election superintendent. Is this time for questions? When did the board discuss this issue?
I had a conversation.
I said, when did the board discuss this issue?
I'm going to answer your question, Mr. Kennedy. I discussed this issue with you.
See, you won't answer my question. I want to know, when did the board discuss this question and this issue about my eligibility?
So let me try a different approach.
No, I just want you to answer the question. I want you to try a different approach. I want you to answer the question. I don't want that hemming and hawing going on. I want you to answer the question.
Mr. Kennedy, just let him answer the question.
No, Mr. Chairman. Ask him to respond to the question. I'm not interested in a whole bunch of lecture and hemming and hawing and going around the bush. Just answer the question. It's a simple question. When in your records you got tapes of everything that happened, I want to know, did you go back and research the tapes and find a tape of when the board discussed the issue? If the issue persists after discussion by the local board and the issue is related to eligibility for office, you should contact your local election superintendent. You already contacted the superintendent. Tell me when the board discussed this issue concerning eligibility. That's a simple question.
It's a simple question. The answer is I do not. That was not an issue that was on an agenda of a board meeting.
Okay, did we ever discuss it? Did the board ever discuss it? Yes or no?
It was not discussed in an official board meeting.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Next question. I don't need no answers. I don't need anything else. I got a question.
He can explain.
Explain it then. Go right ahead. Go right ahead and explain it.
When Mr. Kendall did not attend the training in December, I attempted to call him then. He actually had a conversation with Mr. Holmes. In January, I had a conversation with Mr. Kendall about the training that he missed. He said at that time, basically, that he had been on the county commission, that he knows what required training is, and that he would look into it. We came back to this board meeting that I showed you a tape of. We had a conversation at that board meeting in the session where we talked about what training he had not done. And then I came back this past November. I called Mr. Kendall and asked him if he was going to seek re-election. At that time, he said he didn't know. I told him then I thought it was still an issue of him not getting the training done. And on the day that I signed the letter that I sent to Ms. Collins, I called his office twice to attempt to talk to him. That's what I did to make sure you were fully aware of this being an issue.
Well, let's just make this abundantly clear for everybody in the audience and everybody that's following the camera.
Mr. Kennedy, it's not the time for you to...
The board never discussed in a board meeting any matters pertaining to my eligibility. Yes or no?
No.
Next question I got. Next question I have. Tell me that question. Did somebody on this board seek an opinion from the legislative council?
Not on the board, Mr. Shepherd did.
Okay. Did we get a response from the legislative council?
Mr. Shepherd did, and I think he's going to share that later.
Can we get a copy of that?
You've already got a copy of this, didn't
But can everybody get a copy of it?
you? I think they have one.
Okay, where is it? I didn't see it in my
I think they got one in
package.
their package.
I didn't see it.
If not, I got it.
I don't see one in mine. And did you send me a copy?
No.
Okay.
Mr. Fortune called me today saying you wanted a copy of my opinion letter. And, he told me he had sent you a copy of the, opinion letter from legislative council that I'd already provided to him.
Okay,
As attorney for the board of elections.
where is our copy?
I thought it was in your packet. If not,
Did anybody have it in their package?
if it's not, I've got it right here and I'll be glad to let somebody make a copy.
Okay, well, how about making a copy for everybody?
Well, I think I'll let somebody else do it. I'm not
Okay.
the secretary.
Curtis, have you seen that letter?
I have,
Have you read it?
I have.
Do you understand it?
Don't insult me.
Do you agree with it?
No, I don't.
What did it say?
I don't agree with it. Mr.
What
Shepherd,
did it say? Just
That's
answer the question. What did it say?
I'm about to do that.
Okay.
That is not part of what I presented here. Mr. Shepherd's going to talk about that when he follows next.
I'm just
You can wait.
asking you.
And I
This
just
is the
told you,
point, this is time to ask questions. What did it say?
Mr. Shepherd will to go over that when he presents his
When
part.
did you get it?
I didn't get it.
When did you ask for it, Tim? Do I need to ask these to
You need
him?
to wait for Mr., I think, Mr. Shepherd.
I
he needs
don't
to
know
wait till-
responding. I asked for it Monday of last week after, I was informed that the Board of Elections had asked for this board to take a position with regard to if your failure to get your training hours and your eligibility to, qualify for reelection. And the Board of Elections also wanted an opinion letter from me. I don't represent the Board of Elections, so I can't give them an opinion letter, but I did prepare an opinion letter for this board. But as a part of that, I talked to folks at the DOE, GSBA. I also contacted our representative, David Knight, and asked if he could either obtain an opinion letter from legislative council or copies of the committee minutes when Senate Bill 84 was being debated. Representative Knight called me back and got Colonel Jones also on a three-way sometime last Wednesday evening. So I actually had the opinion letter emailed to me sometime Wednesday.
Last Wednesday.
Yes.
Who is the legislative council?
Let- If I finish up with Dr. Jones, and then Tim will come up and do his.
Okay. Well, if he didn't want to answer the question, maybe I just need to answer these questions to Tim, since he doesn't know. Because I got some other questions I want to ask him, but I want to ask him about this letter from the legislative council first.
We'll save that for Mr. Shepherd. I don't think Dr. Jones knows about that. Ask Dr.
Okay.
Jones whatever he can answer.
All right. So, who wrote that letter to Ms. Collins, Curtis?
Mr. Shepherd drafted it for me.
Mr. Shepard drafted it for you, all right? Who authorized you to send it to Ms. Collins?
I believe, based on the PowerPoint that I shared with you earlier today that Dr. Bart provided, I, as the superintendent, as a part of the governing board, or any board member could have sent it, because it does not take board action based on that PowerPoint that you saw in order for it to be sent.
Okay. Go back to that PowerPoint for me, if you don't mind.
Which part?
That next, the one we were looking at previously. Is there any reason why you skipped over that part about if the issue persists after discussion with the local board, issues related to eligibility to contact? Is there any part why you skipped over that part, discussion with the board, before you sent that letter down there?
I believe, again, as I said earlier, I've had multiple conversations with you, and I thought that's what I did.
I understand that, but that's not responsive to my question. I
It's
said,
answering
why
your
did you skip over that part, since you going by all of your presentations, all of this stuff you got from Phil Hartley, everything you got, you tried to follow these instructions. All right, you following instructions, right? So why didn't you follow that instruction part where it says, if the issue persists after discussion by the local board?
The board didn't discuss it.
Okay, but I'm saying, well, why didn't the board discuss it?
You need to ask the board, Mr. Kendall, not me.
Okay, so that was a board matter. If we needed to discuss that, we should have discussed it amongst ourselves.
I will say what I said before. I'm a part of the governance team, that's the superintendent plus the board. The board did not discuss the training that you did not complete in an official board meeting, but we have had conversations, you and I, and when I looked at this and I understood, I believe the next step for me to do is to notify the board of elections.
Well, who else did you talk to other than Tina?
You mean sent?
No, before you sent that letter down there.
Okay, so let's go back.
I mean, on the board. Who else on the board did you talk to?
Let's go back. So the day that you did not train, I talked with Mr. Holmes. Since then, I've talked with Mr. Graham, I've talked with Mr. Westbury, I've talked with Ms. Cook, and I've talked with you.
Who did you talk to about sending that letter down there?
I talked with Mr. Shepherd about sending the letter. I did have a conversation with Mr. Westbury to tell him I was sending the letter.
Did you have a conversation with Mr. Holmes, Mr. Graham, Ms. Cook, or myself?
No,
All right. Did you send any one of them a copy of the letter?
no,
Did you review the letter with anybody other than Tim before you sent it?
no.
Mr. Westbury didn't see the letter.
Not that I'm aware of.
So it was basically you and Tim who wrote the letter.
It was me as the superintendent, as the secretary of the board that did it, just as I completed the compliance report that I sent to the Georgia Department of Education.
Okay. Have you ever prepared a letter as such since 2011
No,
to send to Terry Collins?
no,
Did you have any need or have the understanding that you needed to send a letter in 2012 when Ms. Cook and Mr. Westbury ran?
no.
Why not?
They completed all the requirements, didn't think of it.
Okay,
It was
so
not an issue.
it didn't matter, did it?
It was not an issue.
Okay.
At this point, it is an issue.
How many hours do you have that I have completed? In which years? Where are the records?
Ms. Mullins has them in her office. What you have completed in FY 11 was 3. I believe FY 12 was 3, and FY 13 was 9, and FY 14, which is the current year we're in, so far you've done 6.
Okay. And where are these records?
By Georgia law, they are maintained by the people who provide the training. They're the ones that send in the official records to the Georgia Department of Education and the state board. We usually get a copy. At GSBA, it's a it's a 3-sheet form. Usually one is turned in, the white copy, to GSBA. You get to keep the pink copy, I think, and we bring one back here.
Well, how many hours do I have with GSBA for each one of these years?
In FY 12, the year we're talking about, you have none. And 13, you have 6 because you went to the training with Phil Hartley, I believe. And then in this past year, you have 6.
Okay. And where did you get that from?
Let me ask you a question. Ms. Mullins, is that in the folder back there? Yes. So that's where I got it from.
You got it from the folder.
So I got it from a folder that we have where we try to maintain what documentation you give to us. But if you attend different training and you don't modify the training plan as you've been requested, then I don't know.
So go ahead.
That's why I asked at that board meeting if you had additional hours that I didn't know about.
Okay, so these are hours that you kept up with.
Yes, for your benefit.
Okay, so if somebody else had something you didn't know about it, then what?
By the state rule, you are supposed to come back to a regular meeting of the board and modify or amend the training plan that has been done, because that training plan that I showed you was sent in saying this is what the board is going to do, individually and collectively. So if you did something without getting it approved, then that's not in accordance with the state board rules.
So who has the official records? Who keeps these official records?
The providers of the training keep the official records that they have, and then they send it in to the State Department of Education.
So what do they have the State Board of Education for?
I don't know that.
You don't know. So why is it that you are the official person that is supposed to report all of this?
Because just as I showed you in the video, I have a requirement to turn in how much training you have completed. You have a requirement to verify what that number is. I gave you an opportunity to say if it was right or wrong. You said it was correct,
Okay.
but I'm required to turn that in.
So I got him, at this point, I got some other questions I'll have to talk to Mr. Shepherd, if you don't mind, Mr.
Ask, no, ask him. Don't
Now,
keep
cause
this
see,
thing
I wanna
going.
ask him after I talk, get some clarification from Mr. Shepherd, cause I got some other things I need to talk to him, but you said I need to talk to him about what he knows. I wanna talk to him about his letter.
I'll permit it, but I'm gonna limit it to anything that comes up
Okay,
in
that's
Tim's
fine.
presentation that you don't know about right now.
Okay.
All right.
Let me first touch on the issue with the letter that Mr. Kendall asked Colonel Jones. When it was obvious that there was an issue with regard to Mr. Kendall's eligibility to run for re-election, I talked with Colonel Jones about it, and I also talked with the chairman, Mr. Westbury, about it. And we determined, the three of us, that the best course of action would be to write a letter that placed the superintendent of elections on notice of that provision of Senate Bill 84, since it was a fairly recent statute, and also attach the reporting forms that Colonel Jones referenced to that letter, and just state basically as a matter of fact what the effect of that was, and that was an issue, just to put them on notice. This board doesn't have the jurisdiction to determine qualifications for election by one of its members. That's with the superintendent of elections, which in Spalding County is the board of elections. Now, as far as the contents of the letter, I drafted it after consultation with Colonel Jones and Mr. Westbury, and I don't recall if I sent Mr. Westbury a copy before Colonel Jones signed it, or I talked to him by phone to let him know what the contents were. But it wasn't just a matter of Colonel Jones and I sitting down and drafting a letter. And then so we sent it down.
I'm gonna check. I don't recall whether I saw it or whether you read it to me, but what I understand what it said when it ultimately went over there is what you shared with me.
I was asked to prepare an opinion letter, excuse me, with regard to the provision of this new statute. And I'm going to tell you, and the reason I think I was asked to prepare an opinion letter is the statute's really very poorly written.
Mr. Shepherd, before you go into that, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask a question about something Ms. Shepherd just said. You were saying this board doesn't have jurisdiction to determine whether or not Mr. Kendall's qualification. So I just want to be clear. Why are we here?
Is that directed toward me or?
Let me answer as the chairman. The board of elections asked us to, as I understand it, and Mr. Shepherd may get to it, to either file a complaint or take a position as to qualification. And the board came in here to take some action, but this, in my opinion as chairman, it's not for us to decide qualifications. It may be our role to decide whether the training requirements have been met and report that to the Board of Elections. And they can do whatever they need to in terms of what the law requires there, but it's not really for us to determine the qualifications of the board members who run for office.
Just from my understanding of what has already occurred on this situation, the Board of Election had a meeting, and their attorney pushed it back on us for us to make a decision.
Actually, there's a hearing in the morning, and they've asked us to get back to them.
Yeah, I'm fully aware of that, but originally, the original meeting, from what I understand, where Mr. Kendall went down and Mr. Fortune and everybody was there, Mr. Fortune didn't want to touch it push it back on the school board to determine eligibility. But now, we don't have jurisdiction to determine eligibility. So I just wanna make sure, why are we here? What are we gonna do?
Mr. Holmes, the best response I can give, I've told you everything I know, and the best source for why we're here is gonna be Mr. Shepherd, because he's the one that's actually communicated with the Board of Elections.
And Mr. Holmes, that, your statement as to Mr. Fortune's position is not entirely accurate. And let me talk to you about that meeting. That meeting on that Friday is, as I understood it from conversation with Ms. Collins and Mr. Fortune, was for the Board of Elections to meet in a fairly hastily called meeting to just review the documents and the law that I provided to Ms. Collins and Mr. Fortune. And actually, we were told that no need in us coming to do a very short meeting. So in that meeting, that's when I understand that the Board of Elections wanted this board to take a position with regard to Mr. Kendra's qualification and wanted an opinion letter from me. Mr. Fortune and I have talked on a number of occasions since that meeting, and I've made it clear, and let me back up, Mr. Fortune, what he was wanting was this board to act as the complaining party. And I told him it was my opinion and my advice to the board that this board was not the complaining party. The election laws, I understand it, is that if an issue as to a candidate's qualification comes up, if that issue is made known to the Board of Elections, then the Superintendent of Elections can address it on their own motion. One other issue, answering your question about why the meeting, Mr. Kendall wrote an email to the board chair requesting a board hearing to discuss what authority Colonel Jones had to send the letter down to the Board of Elections. And there's a draft resolution that's in your packet for the board's consideration, basically ratifying Colonel Jones's actions in writing the letter. Now, that may have more than answered your question.
All right, let Mr. Shepherd finish, and then just get on, because I think we're jumping around here.
You wait a minute, Mr. Chairman. See, Tim, you're raising all the other kind of questions. You say you gave the board all this advice. I haven't heard not one bit of this advice you claim you gave the board. So when you say the board, who did you give that advice to?
Superintendent and the board chair.
Okay, right. You just gave it to them. So
I'm
you need to be
giving-
clear
I'm
when
giving-
you say you gave it to the board. You gave it to the two of them. You haven't given the board anything. Because I never heard that you
I
just
just
said.
did.
Okay.
I
Well, be
just
clear
did.
when you say you gave it to the board. Let everybody know you meant you gave it to Curtis and Mr. Westbury.
I think
They
everybody.
don't make the board.
You're arguing, Mr. Shepherd, you need to let him finish.
Now, I was asked to prepare an opinion. And as I was saying, this statute, which is actually a portion of Senate Bill 84, was added to the existing statute that dealt with eligibility and ineligibility to serve on the school board. Let me give you just a quick background on how all this came about, and it leads to my opinion on what the intent of the legislature was on passing the statute. And I respectfully disagree with legislative counsel, and I'll point out why I think he and I disagree. If you recall, back in 2008, the Clayton County school system lost their accreditation. And when the elected leaders, the governor, other elected leaders found out that they were virtually powerless to do anything about the mess that they had up there, the governor appointed a task force of statewide leaders to make recommendations as to how issues with the public school system in Georgia could be addressed. And out of that came Senate Bill 84. The gist of what's in Senate Bill 84, and it was a fairly lengthy document that, I think it was like 11 different statutes that it dealt with in there. The gist of it was that one of the big problems with local school systems in Georgia was a problem with board governance. And so in Senate Bill 84, the legislature addressed issues with regard to the code of ethics, tightened those up, expanded them, required local boards to adopt specified code of ethics with specified provisions, conflict of interest requirements, nepotism requirements, and board training. There were two different bills, or two different sections of Senate Bill 84 that dealt with board training. One of those sections mandated board training. It mandated that the Georgia School Board Association adopt a training plan for local boards, and then it also mandated that local boards adopt the training plan. Pursuant to that, the state school board adopted the board rule that you saw up there in the presentation that Colonel Jones gave, and that's where we get the requirements of veteran board members, those who have served 1 year or more, having to obtain a minimum of 9 board training hours on an annual basis. And the state school board also mandated, for whatever reason, that annual reporting period would be a fiscal year as opposed to a calendar year, the fiscal year running from July until the next June 30th. As I said, I'll read you what the statute says, but you've got it before you in that packet. The second section of Senate Bill 84 that deals with board training or mandatory board training says as follows. In addition to any other requirements provided by law, no person shall be eligible for election as a member of a local board of education unless he or she, 1, has read and understands the code of ethics and the conflict of interest provisions applicable to members of local boards of education and has agreed to abide by them, and 2, has agreed to annually disclose compliance with the State Board of Education's policy on training for members of local boards of education, the code of ethics of the local board of education, and the conflict of interest provisions applicable to members of local boards of education. The issue that I was asked to address in the opinion letter is, with regard to subsection 2, has agreed to annually disclose compliance. What is the meaning of that term? Does it mean, and it came up because of Mr. Kendall's, that question came up because of the position that Mr. Kendall took in that little short hearing that they had before the Board of Elections, wherein Mr. Kendall, as I understood it, took 2 positions. One is that language only required him to agree to annually disclose. And whether he did or not, it didn't matter. All he had to do was agree to disclose. Or, in the alternative, it only required him to agree to disclose whether he had complied or not. Not that he was required to disclose actual compliance. When you're looking at a statute that's maybe not the best written statute in the world, there's an accepted method for statutory construction that generally a court would employ. And that, according to statute, is that the court should look diligently for the intention of the General Assembly, keeping in view at all times the old law, the evil, and the remedy. As a matter of fact, I ran across another case today when I was researching something not related to this, and there's some language in that case that I think makes a lot of sense. It says, in construing statutes, courts shall look diligently for the intention of the General Assembly. The words of a statute should be given a reasonable and sensible interpretation to carry out the legislative intent and render the statute valid. My opinion that this section of 2251E requires actual compliance with the training requirements is in large part because if you look at the background of how Senate Bill 84 came into being, what the legislature was obviously trying to do, which was to mandate board member training and put some teeth into noncompliance, makes the statute, using these methods of statutory construction, make sense. If you give it the meaning that all I have to do is promise to disclose compliance, and whether or not I keep my promise or not, it doesn't matter, or I just agree to promise to disclose whether I have complied or not, doesn't fit the purpose of the statute and really makes the statute meaningless. Legislative counsel actually focuses on the unnumbered paragraph of that statute dealing with the affidavit that a candidate for election would file. And his position is that the compliance with the statute starts at the time the candidate signs the affidavit affirming that he or she meets all the qualifications required pursuant to this subsection. I will tell you that the opinion that I have given to you, both here and in the opinion letter, is in agreement with the understanding that Ms. Hackmeyer with the Department of Education, the State Department of Education has. It is in agreement with the position that the Georgia School Board Association has. It is consistent with the training that this board has received, both in board member training sessions through authorized trainers authorized by the Department of Education, and the school law seminars that this board has sat through in my presence, because I sat through it with him, and so did Colonel Jones, through the Georgia School Board Association. So it is my opinion that failure of a board member to get their mandated training hours in during their term is a disqualifying factor to run for re-election. But, as I said earlier, that is not for this board to make a determination as to whether or not Mr. Kendall is qualified. But the Board of Elections has asked for some communication from this board as to the board's understanding of that provision and whether or not Mr. Kendall actually got the training hours in, because Mr. Kendall has made a factual issue out of that. And in closing, let me answer one other issue that came up in question of Colonel Jones. Mr. Kendall asked, where is the official record of the hours that the board members receive? I would submit to you the official record is the report that Colonel Jones sends in, him and every other superintendent in the state, sends into the State Board of Election, the State Board of Education that's required by law. And that report, which you have in front of you, each one of you certified by your signature that the number of hours shown in that report are the hours you actually received. So the year in question, which is fiscal year 12, July 1 of 11 through June 30th of 12, the official report of the number of hours Mr. Kendall got in is the report that he signed certifying he had only 3 hours. Mr. Chairman, that's what I've got. I'll answer any questions.
All right, board members, Mr. Kendall.
You guys are amazing. I mean, simply amazing. It's difficult for me to sit here and listen to this nonsense. I'll be honest with you, Curtis. I'm stunned at you particularly. Somebody I've known for 50 years. I'm really stunned that you would actually be participating in this nonsense. Tim, you call up that to the legislative council.
I did not call the legislative council.
Well, you call somebody to get an opinion from the legislative council, lawyer for the legislature who wrote the statute, right?
I don't know if that lawyer wrote the statute.
I said the lawyer for the people who wrote the
He
statute.
is one of an office
Okay.
of lawyers that act as legislative counsel.
What, the legislative council sent us a letter saying that this law didn't even apply to me. Isn't that what the letter said?
Well, first off.
Well, just answer the
No,
question.
no, you asked the question, I'm gonna answer it. And first off, the factual premise for your question is false. Let me finish. The legislative council did not send y'all or me a letter. The letter was addressed to Representative David Knight, and he passed it on to me.
Okay.
Legislative council disagrees with my interpretation of the statute, as well as Phil Hartley's interpretation of the statute and Jennifer Hackmeyer's interpretation of the statute.
My question is this. The legislative council's opinion in this letter says that this law does not even apply to me. Is that right?
His opinion is that it starts applying to you when you sign the affidavit to qualify for election.
Right. Because this law, when I qualified to run in 2010, this law was not on the books. Okay? I never signed an affidavit promising to do anything. And the legislative council, just like Ms. Collins said down there the other day, this law didn't even apply to me because I never had to sign it because it wasn't even in effect in 2010 when I qualified. That's just the fact. Second question is this.
Okay, wait, before you get off that question, Mr. Kimball, I draw your attention to the provision in this statute. It's 2251E that says, this subsection shall apply only to local Board of Education members elected or appointed on or after July 1st of 2010. You were elected in November of 2010.
Okay.
So,
my next
based
question.
on the language of this statute, it does apply.
Okay, listen, we'll get back to that. My next question, why didn't you provide us with a copy of this letter from the legislative council?
You've got a copy of it.
I said, why didn't you give it to us?
Mr. Kimball, I provided a copy. First off, this board is not determining your eligibility.